The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the dusty hotel in Gonzales, Texas, and Prudence Victoria stepped down into the blazing June sun of 1876. Her pearl-buttoned traveling dress already wilted from 3 days of brutal heat and endless miles. She clutched her reticule close, feeling the weight of the bank draft inside that represented her entire inheritance. $20,000 that her deceased father had left her with strict instructions to claim the ranch land he had purchased sight unseen near San Antonio before his sudden death from pneumonia last winter. The streets of Gonzales bustled with activity, cattle drivers and merchants and women in calico dresses moving past weathered storefronts. And Prudence felt terribly alone despite the crowds. A 21-year-old woman from Philadelphia thrust into a world she had only read about in dime novels. She smoothed her honey-colored hair, tucked properly beneath her bonnet, and lifted her carpetbag, searching for someone who looked trustworthy enough to direct her toward lodging. The other passengers from the stage had already dispersed, eager to escape the cramped confines they had shared since leaving Austin. Prudence stood on the wooden sidewalk, squinting against the relentless Texas sun when a shadow fell across her path. "Miss, you look like you could use some help finding your way." The voice was deep and measured, carrying a gentleness that seemed at odds with the rough frontier setting. Prudence looked up into the face of a man perhaps 25 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore a worn leather vest over a chambray shirt, dust-covered denim pants, and scuffed boots that had clearly seen countless miles of hard use. A cattleman's hat shaded his angular features, and a revolver hung low on his right hip, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. "I am perfectly capable of managing, thank you," Prudence said, her Philadelphia propriety making her voice sharper than she intended. She had been warned repeatedly by her traveling companions about the rough characters one encountered in Texas, men who preyed upon vulnerable women. The man touched the brim of his hat and stepped back, his expression neutral. "Did not mean to presume, miss. Just thought you might need directions." "Welcome to Gonzales." He turned to walk away, his spurs making a soft jingle with each step. Prudence watched him go, then looked around the unfamiliar street again, realizing she truly had no idea where to begin. Her pride wrestled with practicality for only a moment before she called out, "Wait, please." He turned back, patient and unhurried. "I do need directions," she admitted, hating how lost she sounded. "I require lodging for the evening, and I need to speak with someone about hiring transportation to San Antonio. I have business there regarding property my father purchased." The man walked back toward her, moving with an easy grace that spoke of years spent on horseback. "The Hamilton house is your best option for respectable lodging. Miss Martha runs a clean establishment. As for transportation to San Antonio, that is more complicated. The stage runs twice weekly, but the next one does not leave for 4 days. 4 days." Prudence felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling. She had intended to reach the property, assess its condition, and make arrangements for its management all within a fortnight. "Is there no other option? A private coach, perhaps?" "Not unless you want to hire a wagon and driver, which would be expensive and potentially dangerous. There have been raids along the San Antonio road. Comancheros mostly, though some say it is just common bandits taking advantage of the lawlessness." He studied her carefully. "Forgive me for being direct, miss, but you do not look like someone familiar with this territory. Are you traveling alone?" "I am quite alone, and I must reach San Antonio as quickly as possible." Prudence straightened her spine, refusing to let this stranger see her anxiety. "My father left me property that requires immediate attention, I cannot afford to wait 4 days." The man seemed to be considering something, his dark eyes thoughtful. "I am heading toward San Antonio myself tomorrow at first light. I have business at a ranch about 10 miles west of the city. If you are willing to ride in a buckboard wagon instead of a proper coach, and you do not mind camping under the stars one night, I could take you there safely. No charge, just Christian charity." Prudence studied him with renewed wariness. "I do not even know your name, sir, and you expect me to travel alone with you across the wilderness?" "Name is Dalton Xerxes," he said, extending his hand. When she hesitated, he withdrew it without offense. "I understand your concern, miss. It would be foolish of you to trust a stranger. But I give you my word as a man raised by a God-fearing mother that I would treat you with complete respect and protection. We can stop by the sheriff's office if you would like verification of my character. Sheriff Tom Morrison has known me since I was a boy." "Why would you offer such help to someone you do not know?" Prudence asked, genuinely puzzled. "In Philadelphia, such offers always came with strings attached." Dalton shrugged. "Because it is the right thing to do. This country is hard enough without folks refusing to help each other when they can. Besides, I have a sister about your age back in Louisiana. I would hope if she ever found herself in need, someone would show her kindness." Something in his straightforward manner made Prudence want to trust him, though her practical nature urged caution. "If the sheriff can indeed vouch for you, then perhaps we might come to an arrangement, though I insist on paying for my passage. We can discuss that later. For now, let me show you to the Hamilton house, and then we will visit the sheriff." Dalton reached for her carpetbag, and this time Prudence allowed him to take it. They walked together down the dusty main street of Gonzales, past the general store and the saloon and the blacksmith's forge, where a man was shoeing a sorrel horse. Prudence was acutely aware of the curious glances directed her way, the frank stares of men unused to seeing an Eastern woman in their midst. Dalton seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps so accustomed to the manners of the West that he thought nothing of it. The Hamilton house proved to be a 2-story wooden building painted white, with a covered porch and window boxes that someone had attempted to fill with flowers, though the heat had left them looking wilted and brown. Dalton held the door for her, and they entered a parlor that was blessedly cooler than the street, with lace curtains filtering the harsh sunlight. A plump woman with graying hair looked up from her needlework, her face breaking into a warm smile when she saw Dalton. "Dalton Xerxes, as I live and breathe. I have not seen you in town for 3 months at least. Hello, Miss Martha. I brought you a guest who needs a room for the evening." Dalton set down the carpetbag. "This is Miss Victoria, just arrived from Philadelphia." "Miss Prudence Victoria," Prudence corrected, extending her hand. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." Martha's handshake was firm and genuine. "Any friend of Dalton's is welcome here. I have a lovely room on the 2nd floor with a view of the square. 50 cents for the night, includes breakfast in the morning." "That would be most acceptable, thank you." Prudence opened her reticle, but Dalton touched her arm gently. "Let me take you to see the sheriff first, so you can make your decision about tomorrow. Miss Martha will hold the room for you." "Of course she will," Martha said, her eyes twinkling with what looked like amusement. "You two run along. I will put fresh linens on the bed." They left the boarding house and continued down the street to a small building with bars on the windows and a star painted on the door. Inside, a weathered man with a silver mustache sat behind a desk covered in papers, his boots propped up as he cleaned a rifle. "Sheriff Morrison," Dalton said by way of greeting, "I have brought someone who needs your counsel." The sheriff looked up, taking in Prudence with one sweeping glance that felt more protective than inappropriate. "Miss, what can I do for you?" "I need to know whether this man is trustworthy," Prudence said bluntly, gesturing toward Dalton. He has offered to transport me to San Antonio tomorrow, and while he seems genuine, I would be foolish to accept without verification. Sheriff Morrison broke into a broad grin. You are wise to check, miss. But I can tell you without reservation that Dalton Xerxes is one of the finest men in this county. He works as a ranch hand over at the Cross Creek Spread, been doing so for 5 years now. Before that, he served honorably in the 9th Texas Cavalry during the tail end of the war, despite being barely old enough to enlist. He does not drink to excess, does not gamble, and I have never once had to lock him up for brawling or disturbing the peace. If he says he will get you safely to San Antonio, you can trust that promise as if it came from the Almighty himself. Prudence felt her shoulders relax slightly. Thank you, Sheriff. That is most reassuring. Might I ask what brings you to Texas, miss? The sheriff had put down his rifle now, giving her his full attention. I have inherited property near San Antonio from my father. I must see to its management. Prudence chose her words carefully, unwilling to mention the substantial bank draft in her possession. Well, you have chosen a good guide. Dalton knows every mile of the road between here and San Antonio, and he can shoot the eye out of a rattlesnake at 50 yards. Sheriff Morrison stood and shook Dalton's hand. You watch out for her, son. That is my intention, Dalton said quietly. They left the sheriff's office and walked back toward the Hamilton house, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty street. Prudence found herself studying Dalton's profile, the strong jaw and the calm confidence in his bearing. He was unlike any man she had known in Philadelphia, where the gentlemen of her acquaintance had been merchants and lawyers, men who worked with their minds and kept their hands soft. What made you come to Texas? Dalton asked, breaking the comfortable silence. This is a long way from Philadelphia. My father always dreamed of owning land in the West, Prudence explained. He spent his whole life as a clerk in a shipping office, saving every penny he could spare. 2 years ago, he purchased a section of land near San Antonio through a land agent, intending to move us both here and start a new life. But then he fell ill last winter, and the pneumonia took him before he could see his dream realized. In his will, he asked that I take possession of the land and do with it what I thought best. I could have sold it sight unseen, but it felt important to honor his wishes by at least seeing what he had sacrificed so much to obtain. That shows great character, Dalton said. Not many Eastern women would undertake such a journey alone. I am my father's daughter, Prudence said simply. He taught me that responsibility cannot be shirked simply because it is difficult or inconvenient. They had reached the Hamilton house again, and Dalton paused on the porch. If you are agreeable, I will collect you tomorrow morning at dawn. We need to make an early start to cover good ground before the heat becomes unbearable. Bring only what you can fit in that carpet bag and wear your sturdiest clothing. The road is rough, and you will want to be comfortable. I will be ready, Prudence promised. She hesitated, then added, Thank you, Dalton. For your kindness and your help, I am grateful. He touched his hat brim in that now familiar gesture. Sleep well, Miss Victoria. Tomorrow will be a long day. Prudence watched him walk away down the darkening street before she went inside to pay Miss Martha for her room. The landlady showed her upstairs to a simple but clean chamber with a brass bed and a washstand, and Prudence sank onto the mattress with relief, her body aching from days of travel. She lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Texas town, the distant laughter from the saloon and the lonely howl of a coyote somewhere out in the darkness. She thought about her father, who had dreamed of this place but never lived to see it. She thought about the property waiting for her near San Antonio, wondering what condition it would be in. And she thought about Dalton Xerxes, the quiet cowboy who had appeared exactly when she needed help, like an answer to a prayer she had not known to speak. Dawn came early, painting the Texas sky in shades of pink and gold. Prudence dressed in her simplest traveling outfit, a dark blue skirt and white shirtwaist that would show the dust less than her finer clothes. She braided her hair and pinned it up securely, knowing that a bonnet would be insufficient protection against the sun. Miss Martha provided a hearty breakfast of eggs and biscuits, and Prudence ate every bite, sensing she would need her strength. True to his word, Dalton arrived just as the sun crested the horizon, driving a sturdy buckboard wagon pulled by two strong-looking mules. He had tied a saddle horse to the back, a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes. The wagon bed contained supplies covered with canvas, and Dalton had rigged a canvas top over the seat to provide some shade. "Morning, Miss Victoria," he greeted her, jumping down to help her with her bag. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I shall ever be," Prudence replied, accepting his hand to climb up onto the wagon seat. The perch was higher than she expected, and her skirts made the maneuver awkward, but she managed it without too much loss of dignity. Dalton secured her carpetbag in the back, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a click of his tongue and a gentle slap of leather, he set the mules into motion, and they rolled out of Gonzales as the town began to wake around them. The road to San Antonio was little more than a track through the countryside, winding through grasslands dotted with mesquite and live oak trees. The morning air was still relatively cool, and Prudence found herself relaxing despite her initial nervousness. Dalton was a quiet companion, content to let the silence stretch between them, but there was nothing uncomfortable about it. After an hour of travel, Prudence ventured a question. "The sheriff mentioned you work at a ranch. What is it that you do there?" "I am a ranch hand," Dalton said. "I work with the cattle mostly, herding them, branding them, doctoring them when they are sick. During roundup season, I help drive them to market. It is hard work, but honest, and I like being outdoors. I spent too much of my youth cooped up in a schoolhouse. My mother was determined I would learn to read and write properly, even though my father thought it was a waste of time for a boy destined to work with his hands." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Prudence said. "Education is never wasted." "She would have liked you," Dalton replied, then seemed to catch himself. "What I mean is, she always said that a person's worth was measured by their character and their mind, not by their circumstances or their wealth." "You remind me of her a bit, the way you carry yourself with dignity even though you are clearly far from home and uncertain." Prudence felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "What happened to your parents? You spoke of your mother in the past tense." "Yellow fever took them both about 6 years back. They had a small farm in Louisiana, grew cotton and corn. When they died, my sister Mary went to live with our aunt in New Orleans, and I headed west. I could not stand to stay on that farm without them, everything reminding me of what I had lost." Dalton's voice remained steady, but Prudence heard the old grief underneath. "I ended up in Texas and never left. This land gets into your blood somehow." "I am sorry for your loss," Prudence said quietly. "I understand that pain. Losing my father was like having the ground disappear beneath my feet. Everything I thought was solid and certain suddenly was not." "That is exactly right," Dalton agreed. "But you find your footing again eventually. You learn to walk on the new ground, even though it is not the ground you would have chosen." They continued on through the morning, the sun climbing higher and the heat building despite the canvas shade. Dalton stopped around midday near a creek that ran through a grove of cottonwood trees, and they watered the mules and let them rest. He produced hardtack and jerky from his supplies, along with a canteen of water that tasted faintly of metal but was blessedly cool. "How much further to San Antonio?" Prudence asked, sitting on a fallen log in the shade while Dalton checked the mule's hooves and harness. "We will camp tonight about halfway there, then reach the city by tomorrow afternoon," Dalton said. "The mules need rest, and it is not safe to travel this road after dark. Too easy to break a wheel in a rut you cannot see, and too easy to encounter trouble." "What sort of trouble?" Prudence asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The kind Sheriff Morrison mentioned. Bandits, mostly. Sometimes renegade Comanches who have left the reservation, though that has become less common in recent years. Sometimes just desperate men who see a lone traveler and decide to take their chances." Dalton straightened up from examining a mule's hoof and looked at her directly. "I will not let anyone hurt you, Miss Victoria. You have my word on that." The simple certainty in his voice made Prudence believe him completely. "I trust you," she said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. In just one day, this quiet cowboy had earned her confidence in a way that men she had known for years back in Philadelphia never had. They traveled through the hot afternoon, and Prudence watched the landscape change subtly, the grass becoming sparser, the trees more gnarled and twisted by wind and drought. Dalton pointed out wildlife as they went, a roadrunner dashing across their path, a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, a small herd of pronghorn antelope in the distance. He had an easy knowledge of this land, a comfort with the wilderness that spoke of deep familiarity. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Dalton guided the wagon off the main track toward a cluster of rocks that formed a natural windbreak. "We will camp here," he announced. "There is good grass for the animals, and the rocks will hide our fire from any watching eyes." He helped Prudence down from the wagon, and she stood stiffly, her back aching from the long day of jostling. While Dalton unhitched the mules and tended to his horse, Prudence looked around their campsite, seeing nothing but empty land stretching in all directions. The isolation should have frightened her, but instead she felt an odd sense of peace, as if the vastness of the landscape had somehow quieted the anxious chatter in her mind. Dalton built a small fire and set a coffee pot to boil, then produced a cast iron skillet and began frying bacon and beans. The smell made Prudence's stomach growl, reminding her how long it had been since their meager midday meal. As they ate, sitting on blankets near the fire, the sky overhead deepened from blue to purple to black, and stars began to appear, more stars than Prudence had ever seen in her life. "There are so many," she breathed, staring upward in wonder. "No city lights to hide them out here," Dalton said. "Just the sky and the stars and the land. Sometimes I think this is what heaven must look like, this kind of beauty and silence." "It is remarkable," Prudence agreed. "I never imagined anything like this. In Philadelphia, you can barely see the stars at all through the smoke and the gas lamps." Dalton poured her more coffee, the strong, bitter brew warming her against the surprising chill of the night air. "Tell me about this property you have inherited," he said. "What are you hoping to find?" Prudence wrapped her hands around the tin cup, grateful for its warmth. "Honestly, I do not know. My father's lawyer showed me the deed, which describes 160 acres with a house and outbuildings, but there were no drawings or photographs. The land agent who sold it to my father assured him it was good property with water rights and potential for farming or ranching, but land agents are notorious for their exaggerations. I suppose I will know the truth when I see it." "And then what will you do?" Dalton asked. "Will you try to work the land yourself, or sell it and return to Philadelphia?" It was a question Prudence had been avoiding, even in her own mind. "I do not know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to honor my father's dream by making a go of it here. But I am realistic enough to know that I have no experience with farming or ranching, no knowledge of this land or how to survive in it. The sensible course would be to sell to someone who could actually make use of it. Yet doing so feels like giving up on my father's dream, like admitting his sacrifice was for nothing." "His sacrifice was not for nothing if it brought you here," Dalton said quietly. "Maybe the dream was never about the specific piece of land. Maybe it was about giving you possibilities, options you would not have had if you stayed in Philadelphia as a clerk's daughter." Prudence had never considered it that way, and the thought struck her with unexpected force. That is a generous interpretation, or just an honest one. Dalton stood and began banking the fire. "You should get some rest. I have laid out blankets for you in the wagon bed, and I will sleep underneath it so I am close if you need anything. Do not worry about wild animals or bandits. I am a light sleeper and I will keep watch." Prudence climbed awkwardly into the wagon bed, discovering that Dalton had indeed made her a comfortable pallet with several layers of blankets, and even a rolled-up coat for a pillow. She lay down fully clothed, feeling the strange combination of exhaustion and alertness that came from being in an unfamiliar place. Through the gap in the canvas cover, she could see that incredible expanse of stars, and she let herself be mesmerized by them as her breathing slowed and sleep crept up on her. She woke sometime in the deep night to the sound of voices, low and threatening. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and then the events of the day came rushing back. She lay perfectly still, listening. "We know you got supplies in that wagon," a rough voice was saying. "Maybe money too. Hand it over peaceful-like and we will let you ride on." "There is nothing here worth stealing," Dalton's voice replied, calm and steady. "Just basic provisions and a passenger trying to reach San Antonio. I suggest you fellows move along before this gets ugly. 3 against 1, friend. I do not think you are in a position to make suggestions." Another voice, younger and meaner. Prudence's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might be audible. Very carefully, she shifted position until she could peer through a gap in the canvas. In the faint starlight, she could make out 3 shapes on horseback surrounding Dalton, who stood near the remains of their campfire with his hands hanging loose at his sides. "I am going to give you one more chance to ride away," Dalton said, his voice still eerily calm. "After that, I cannot guarantee your safety." One of the men laughed, an ugly sound. Big talk from a man facing 3 gun barrels. What happened next occurred so fast that Prudence barely registered the movement. Dalton's hand flashed to his holster, and 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, the muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. 2 of the men yelped and grabbed their gun hands, weapons falling to the ground. The third wheeled his horse around and spurred it hard, fleeing into the night without looking back. "You are lucky I aimed for your hands and not your hearts," Dalton said to the 2 remaining men. "Now get out of here before I change my mind." The 2 bandits needed no further encouragement. They turned their horses and galloped away, leaving their fallen weapons behind. Dalton stood motionless for a long moment, his revolver still drawn, watching and listening to make sure they were truly gone. Then he holstered his weapon and turned toward the wagon. "You can sit up now, Miss Victoria, they are gone." Prudence pushed aside the canvas and stared at him. "How did you do that? There were 3 of them." "Practice," Dalton said simply, "and the element of surprise. They thought they had me cornered, which made them careless. Are you all right?" "I am unharmed, if that is what you mean, but I am not certain I will sleep again tonight." Prudence was shaking, the aftermath of fear making her hands tremble. Dalton climbed up onto the wagon seat and retrieved a blanket, then wrapped it around her shoulders despite the fact that she was already covered. "It is just shock," he said gently. "Your body's way of releasing the tension. Sit for a moment and breathe slowly. It will pass." He settled beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. Gradually, Prudence's breathing steadied and the shaking subsided. She became aware of how close Dalton was, close enough that she could smell wood smoke and leather and something else, something clean and masculine that was distinctly him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting me. The sheriff was right about your shooting." "I told you I would keep you safe," Dalton reminded her. "I meant it." They sat together in the quiet darkness, and Prudence found herself studying his profile in the starlight, the strong lines of his face and the gentle curve of his mouth. This man, this stranger who had appeared in her life less than 2 days ago, had just risked his own safety to defend her without hesitation. The men in Philadelphia she had known, the suitors who had called on her with flowers and pretty words, would have fled at the first sign of danger. But Dalton had stood his ground, confident and capable, and she realized with startling clarity that she was seeing what true strength looked like for the first time in her life. "You should try to rest," Dalton said eventually. "We still have a long day of travel tomorrow, and you will need your energy. I promise, I will not let anyone else disturb our camp." Prudence wanted to protest that she could not possibly sleep after such excitement, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. She lay back down on her pallet, and this time sleep came quickly, dreamless and deep. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Dalton moving around the camp, packing up their gear. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, turning it the color of ripe peaches. Prudence climbed out of the wagon feeling stiff and rumpled, and she gratefully accepted the cup of coffee Dalton handed her. "How did you sleep?" he asked, his dark eyes searching her face with concern. "Better than I expected," Prudence admitted. "Though I confess I did dream about gunshots and galloping horses." "That will fade," Dalton assured her. "The mind needs time to process frightening experiences. By the time we reach San Antonio, it will seem like something that happened to someone else." They ate a quick breakfast of leftover biscuits and jerky, then broke camp and resumed their journey. The morning passed uneventfully, the landscape gradually changing as they drew closer to San Antonio. More farms appeared, small homesteads with fields of corn and beans, and they passed other travelers on the road, wagons and riders who waved greetings as they went by. Dalton seemed more relaxed now that they were approaching civilization, and he pointed out landmarks as they went. "That is the Medina River up ahead. Once we cross it, we are only about 5 miles from the city proper. What address is your property near?" Prudence pulled out the deed from her reticule, squinting at her father's careful handwriting. "The description says it is 10 miles west of San Antonio, along the road to Castroville, near a place called Leon Springs." Dalton nodded. "I know that area. It is good land, with plenty of water from the springs." "If the property is what the deed describes, you may have inherited something quite valuable." "I will try not to get my hopes up," Prudence said, but she could feel anticipation building in her chest. After all the miles and all the uncertainty, she was finally going to see what her father had dreamed of. They reached San Antonio in the early afternoon, and Prudence stared in fascination at the city that was unlike anything she had expected. Old Spanish missions rose from the landscape like ancient sentinels, their stone walls weathered by centuries of sun and wind. The streets were crowded with people speaking Spanish and English and German, a mixture of cultures that created a vibrant, chaotic energy. Vendors sold fresh produce and handmade goods from carts, and the smell of cooking meat and spices filled the air. Dalton navigated through the busy streets with the ease of someone familiar with the city, and they continued westward on the Castroville Road. As they left the bustle of San Antonio behind, Prudence found herself growing nervous. What if the property was worthless? What if the house was nothing but a ruin? What if her father had been swindled by an unscrupulous land agent? There, Dalton said, pointing ahead. That marker by the road, that is Leon Springs. Your property should be just beyond it. They followed a narrow track that branched off the main road, winding through groves of oak trees and across a meadow thick with wildflowers. And then, suddenly, there it was. The house was small but solidly built, constructed of native limestone with a wooden shake roof. It sat on a slight rise overlooking a clear creek that bubbled over smooth stones, and behind it stood a barn and several smaller outbuildings in good repair. The land rolled away in all directions, covered in thick grass that waved in the breeze, and Prudence could see the sparkle of the springs in the distance, feeding the creek that ran through the property. "Oh," she breathed, unable to form more coherent words. Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and sat quietly, letting her take it all in. "It is beautiful," he said simply. Prudence climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help, walking toward the house as if in a dream. The front door was unlocked, and she pushed it open to reveal a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end and windows that let in the golden afternoon light. The floor was made of smooth wooden planks, and there were built-in shelves and a ladder leading to a sleeping loft above. It was simple and rustic, nothing like her father's cramped rooms in Philadelphia, but it was clean and well-made and full of possibility. She walked back outside to find Dalton unhitching the mules, giving them access to the creek to drink. "My father never saw this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He paid for it and dreamed of it, but he never got to see how perfect it is." "No, but you saw it," Dalton said gently. "And maybe that is what mattered to him. Not that he got to live his dream, but that you had the chance to." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She was not a woman who cried easily, but the weight of the journey and the fear and the unexpected beauty of this place had cracked something open inside her. "I do not know the first thing about managing a ranch," she admitted. "I do not know how to raise cattle or grow crops or any of it. I am utterly useless here." "You are not useless anywhere," Dalton said firmly. He walked over to her, his expression serious. "You are intelligent and resourceful, and those qualities matter more than experience. Everything else can be learned." "But I would need help," Prudence said. "I would need someone who knows this land and this life to teach me." Dalton was quiet for a moment, and Prudence held her breath, not quite sure what she was hoping he would say. Finally, he spoke. "The business I mentioned having near San Antonio, the reason I was traveling this direction anyway, it was to tell my boss at the Cross Creek Ranch that I am leaving. I have been saving money for 5 years, and I finally have enough to buy a small herd of cattle and start my own operation. I have been looking for land to lease, somewhere with good water and grass, but everything close to Gonzales has been taken or too expensive." Prudence's heart was beating very fast. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that this property could support cattle, probably 200 or 300 head to start. And I am saying that if you wanted a partner, someone to work the land and build up a herd and teach you the business, I would be interested in discussing terms." Dalton met her eyes directly. "It would be purely a business arrangement, of course. You would keep ownership of the land, and we would split the profits from any cattle we sold. I would build myself a small cabin on the far side of the property, so everything would be proper and respectable. Why would you want to partner with me? Prudence asked. You could find another piece of land to lease, work with someone who actually knows what they are doing. Because I like you, Dalton said simply. Because I respect your courage in coming here alone to honor your father's dream. Because I think we would work well together. And because, if I am being completely honest, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since you stepped off that stage in Gonzales looking lost and determined at the same time. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Prudence felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity of her own response. She had known Dalton for only 2 days, and yet she trusted him more than men she had known her whole life. She felt safe with him, protected and respected in equal measure. And if she was being honest with herself, she had not been able to stop thinking about him either. I would need time to consider such a proposition, she said, trying to sound practical and businesslike even though her pulse was racing. It would be a significant commitment for both of us. Of course, Dalton agreed. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, let me look around the property and the outbuildings, assess what condition everything is in. That will give us a better sense of what would be required to make this a working ranch. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property together. The barn was in excellent condition, with stalls for horses and space for hay storage. The smaller outbuildings included a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a tool shed stocked with basic equipment. The springs that gave the area its name bubbled up from limestone rocks about a quarter-mile from the house, creating a steady flow of clean water that fed the creek. The land itself was rich and rolling, with enough grass to support grazing animals and enough trees to provide shelter and lumber. "This is better than I dared to hope," Dalton said as they walked back toward the house in the golden light of late afternoon. "Your father made a wise investment. With work and time, this could be one of the finest small ranches in the area." "Then you think it is worth trying?" Prudence asked. "It is not foolish to consider staying here instead of returning to Philadelphia." Dalton stopped walking and turned to face her. "What is waiting for you in Philadelphia? What kind of life would you have there?" Prudence considered the question honestly. "I would find work as a teacher, perhaps, or a governess. I would rent a small room somewhere and live quietly and carefully, trying to make my father's modest savings last as long as possible. Eventually, I might marry someone suitable, a clerk or a shopkeeper, and raise children in the same narrow circumstances my father spent his whole life trying to escape. It would be safe and predictable and utterly ordinary." "And is that what you want?" Dalton asked quietly. "No," Prudence said, the word escaping before she could think better of it. "No, it is not what I want at all. I want to build something here. I want to take my father's dream and make it real, make it thrive. I want to wake up to this view every morning and know that I am doing something that matters. But I cannot do it alone." "You would not be alone," Dalton said. "If you agree to partner with me, I swear to you that I would work every day to make this ranch successful. I would teach you everything I know about cattle and horses and this land. I would protect you and respect you and never give you reason to regret trusting me." "I do trust you," Prudence said. "That is perhaps the most remarkable part of all this. I have known you for 2 days, and yet I trust you more than people I have known my entire life. You have shown me nothing but kindness and honor. Those are easy to show when the person deserves them," Dalton said. His hand reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, his fingers gently brushed a strand of hair that had escaped from her braid. "I meant what I said earlier. I have not stopped thinking about you, and not just as a potential business partner." Prudence's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying, Dalton?" "I am saying that I am attracted to you, that I admire your courage and your intelligence, that I lie awake wondering what it would be like to court you properly, to take you to church socials and on buggy rides, to learn all the small things about you that a man learns about a woman when he is hoping to win her heart." He dropped his hand, stepping back slightly. "But I am also saying that I would never presume or push. If you want only a business arrangement, I will respect that completely. Your comfort and your safety matter more than my feelings." Prudence felt as if her world had tilted on its axis. This strong, capable man was standing before her being vulnerable and honest, offering her not just a business partnership but the possibility of something more, and giving her complete freedom to choose. It was so different from the clumsy courtship she had endured in Philadelphia, where men had seemed more interested in her potential domestic abilities than in her as a person. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "This is all happening so fast. 2 days ago, I had never met you. Now you are talking about courtship and hearts." "You are right," Dalton said immediately. "I am rushing things. Forgive me. Let us go back to the business discussion. That is complicated enough without adding romantic feelings into the mixture." But Prudence found herself reaching out, her hand catching his before he could turn away. "I did not say I was not interested," she said quietly. "I simply said it was fast. But perhaps fast is what happens sometimes, when two people meet at exactly the right moment in their lives. I am attracted to you too, Dalton. I feel safe with you in a way I never have with anyone else. And the thought of building this ranch with you as not just a partner, but as someone I might be courting, that thought makes me happier than I have been since my father died." Dalton's face transformed, his serious expression giving way to a smile of pure joy. "Are you saying yes to the partnership and to letting me court you properly?" "I am saying yes to the partnership," Prudence said, feeling giddy and terrified in equal measure. "And I am saying that I am open to the possibility of courtship, with the understanding that we will take things slowly and see how we suit each other. Is that acceptable?" "That is more than acceptable," Dalton said. "That is perfect." They stood smiling at each other in the fading light, and Prudence felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. This was where she was meant to be, on this piece of land her father had chosen, with this man who had appeared exactly when she needed him most. "We should head back into San Antonio before dark," Dalton said reluctantly. "You will need to find lodging for the night, and I need to speak with my former employer and begin making arrangements to move my things here. There is a lot to be done before we can actually start running cattle." "How long will it take?" Prudence asked as they walked back to the wagon. "A few weeks, probably. I will need to give proper notice at the Cross Creek Ranch, then purchase cattle and bring them here. You will need to establish yourself in San Antonio, let people know you are claiming this property, and start buying supplies for the house. We should also draw up a proper partnership agreement, something legal that protects both of our interests." Dalton helped her up onto the wagon seat. "It would be best if you stayed in San Antonio during this transition period. The Hamilton House has a branch there, a boarding house for respectable women. You would be safe and comfortable while we make preparations." As they drove back toward San Antonio, Prudence found herself looking back at the property until it disappeared from view. Already it felt like home, like the place she had been traveling toward her entire life without knowing it. And the man beside her, guiding the mules with steady hands and occasional glances in her direction that made her pulse quicken, he felt like home too. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Prudence established herself at the boarding house Dalton had recommended, a clean establishment run by a stern but kind woman named Mrs. Olivia Garcia, who took Prudence under her wing. She helped Prudence navigate the shops of San Antonio, bargaining in rapid Spanish with merchants until Prudence had acquired everything necessary to set up a household. Cookware and dishes, bedding and curtains, food staples like flour and sugar and coffee, even a few chickens to start a flock. Dalton visited every few days, reporting on his progress. He had given notice at the Cross Creek Ranch, and his employer, while sorry to lose him, had been generous in his farewell, even helping Dalton negotiate a good price on 30 head of young cattle from a rancher who was selling off part of his herd. Dalton had also hired 2 Mexican vaqueros he knew and trusted to help drive the cattle to the Leon Springs property and get them settled. Between visits, Prudence found herself thinking about Dalton constantly. She replayed their conversations in her mind, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, the careful respect he showed her even as his feelings were clearly deepening. He never tried to kiss her or even hold her hand, beyond helping her up and down from the wagon, maintaining perfect propriety, but there was an intimacy in the way they talked, sharing stories of their childhoods and their dreams for the future. Prudence learned that Dalton had been only 16 when the Civil War ended, old enough to understand the devastation it had wrought, but young enough to still have hope for a better future. He had worked various jobs as he traveled west, learning skills from cowboys and farmers and railroad workers, until he had found his calling working with cattle. He loved the animals despite their stubbornness, loved the rhythm of ranch life and the satisfaction of honest labor. In turn, Prudence told him about growing up in Philadelphia as an only child, spending evenings reading books by lamplight while her father planned and dreamed of a different life. She had been educated at a girls' academy, learning literature and music, and all the accomplishments deemed necessary for young ladies. But her father had also taught her mathematics and bookkeeping, believing that women should be able to manage their own affairs. That education was proving invaluable now, as she organized supplies and calculated costs, and made plans for the ranch. "Your father was a wise man," Dalton said one afternoon as they sat in the boarding house parlor, reviewing the partnership agreement they had drawn up with the help of a lawyer. "He prepared you well for this, even if he did not know exactly what form it would take." "I wish he could see this," Prudence said softly. "I wish he knew that his dream did come true, just not in the way he expected." "Maybe he does know," Dalton suggested. "Maybe he is looking down and smiling, proud of his brave daughter." The partnership agreement was straightforward. Prudence owned the land and house outright. Dalton would contribute his cattle and his labor and expertise. Any profits from selling cattle would be split equally between them. Either party could dissolve the partnership with 6 months' notice, and if that happened, Dalton would take his cattle and any calves born from them while Prudence would keep the land and buildings. It was fair and clear, protecting both their interests. But as Prudence signed her name to the document, she found herself hoping that the partnership would never need to be dissolved, that instead it would deepen and grow into something permanent and lasting. She caught Dalton's eye across the table and saw the same hope reflected there, and her heart beat faster with possibility. Finally, everything was ready. Dalton arrived one morning with a wagon full of supplies and building materials, and they made the journey out to the property together. The vaqueros were already there, having driven the cattle the day before, and Prudence could see the animals grazing peacefully in the meadow, their red hides bright against the green grass. "Welcome home," Dalton said as he helped her down from the wagon, and Prudence felt tears prick her eyes at the simple words. The next few days were a blur of work. While Dalton and the vaqueros built a small cabin on the far side of the property where Dalton would live, Prudence unpacked her supplies and began making the main house into a proper home. She hung curtains on the windows, arranged her father's few books on the shelves, spread colorful quilts on the bed in the loft. She planted a small vegetable garden near the house, putting in seeds for tomatoes and beans and squash, and she started her chickens in their coop, gathering their warm eggs each morning. The vaqueros, whose names were Miguel and Carlos, were respectful and hardworking, and they seemed to understand without being told that Prudence was not just the property owner but an active participant in the ranch's operation. They taught her how to approach the cattle, how to read their moods and behaviors, how to spot signs of illness or distress. Prudence proved to be an eager student, and Miguel told Dalton approvingly that the señorita had the right spirit for ranch life. In the evenings, after the work was done, and the vaqueros had retired to their camp near the barn, Dalton and Prudence would sit on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the hills and talking about their plans. They discussed breeding strategies for the cattle, calculated how many calves they might expect next spring, debated whether to plant corn for feed or rely on the natural grass. But they also talked about other things, sharing stories and dreams and slowly, carefully, learning the contours of each other's hearts. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had settled onto the property, Dalton brought his guitar to the porch. "I am not particularly good," he warned. "But my mother insisted I learn, said music was good for the soul." He played softly, old songs that Prudence half remembered from her childhood, and she hummed along when she knew the melodies. The music floated out across the darkening land, mingling with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle, and Prudence thought she had never been so content in her entire life. "I have been thinking," Dalton said, setting aside the guitar, "about what I said that first day, about courting you properly, taking you to church socials and buggy rides and such. The problem is, out here, we do not really have those opportunities. We are miles from town, and we both have work that keeps us busy from sunup to sundown. So I have been wondering how to court you in a way that fits our circumstances." "I think you are courting me already," Prudence said softly. "Every time you teach me something new about the cattle or fix something around the house without being asked. Every time you bring me flowers from the meadow or sit with me in the evening like this. I do not need church socials or buggy rides, Dalton. I just need to know that you care, and you show me that every single day." "I do care," Dalton said, his voice rough with emotion. "I care more than I thought possible. Prudence, I know it has only been a few weeks, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it now. You have become the best part of every day." Prudence's heart was racing, and she turned to look at him, seeing in the fading light the honesty and vulnerability in his expression. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I did not expect this when I came to Texas. I expected to see my father's property and make practical decisions about its future. I never expected to find you. I never expected to fall in love." The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying. Dalton stood slowly, moving to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you," Prudence said, her voice steady now. "I love your kindness and your strength and your patience. I love the way you see possibilities instead of problems, and the way you treat me as an equal partner instead of as someone who needs to be managed. I love you, Dalton Xerxes, and I do not care that it is too fast or too soon or too anything. It is simply true." Dalton brought her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverence. "I love you too, Prudence Victoria. I think I started loving you the moment you looked at me with those determined eyes in Gonzales and refused to accept help until you had verified my character. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you." "You are already worthy," Prudence said. She leaned forward, her heart pounding, and very gently pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet, tentative at first and then deepening as Dalton's hand came up to cup her cheek. Prudence felt warmth spread through her entire body, a sense of rightness and completion that made everything else fall away. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Dalton's eyes were bright with emotion. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too soon, and I do not even have a ring, and we have only known each other a few weeks, but marry me anyway. I promise to love you and respect you and work beside you every day for the rest of our lives. I promise to build this ranch into something we can be proud of, and to build a family with you if you want that, and to never take for granted the gift of your trust and your love. Marry me, Prudence." Prudence was crying now, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, laughing through the tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Dalton. Nothing would make me happier." They sealed the promise with another kiss, longer and deeper than the first, and when they finally drew apart, the stars were out in full glory overhead, as if heaven itself was celebrating their love. The next morning, Prudence woke in her loft bedroom to the sound of roosters crowing and cattle lowing, and for a moment she wondered if she had dreamed the events of the previous evening. But then she looked out the window and saw Dalton already up and working, repairing a section of fence, and her heart swelled with the certainty that it had all been real. She was engaged to be married to the finest man she had ever met, and together they were building a life in this beautiful, wild place. They decided to marry quickly, not wanting to wait months or years when they were both certain of their feelings. Miguel and Carlos were delighted by the news, and they volunteered to help spread word among the neighboring ranchers that there would be a wedding. Mrs. Garcia in San Antonio became an enthusiastic ally, helping Prudence shop for a simple but lovely dress, and organizing the modest celebration that would follow the ceremony. 3 weeks after Dalton's proposal, on a blazing hot day in late July, they were married at the old mission in San Antonio by a priest who had married countless couples over his 40 years of service. Prudence wore a dress of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Dalton wore his best clothes, looking nervous and handsome in equal measure. The small chapel was filled with people they had met during their weeks in the area, neighbors and shopkeepers and fellow ranchers who had heard about the Eastern heiress and her cowboy partner and wanted to wish them well. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed her with a joy that made everyone in the chapel smile, and Prudence felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. This was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself back in Philadelphia, nothing like the safe, predictable future she might have had. But it was so much better, filled with love and purpose and the thrill of building something new. They celebrated at the boarding house with a simple meal of beef and vegetables, music provided by a neighbor with a fiddle, and dancing that went on until well after dark. Prudence danced with Dalton, with Miguel and Carlos, with the various ranchers who had come to celebrate, feeling more alive than she ever had. When she and Dalton finally climbed into their wagon to return to the ranch, waving goodbye to their well-wishers, she leaned against his shoulder with profound contentment. "Happy, Mrs. Xerxes?" Dalton asked, using her new name for the first time. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Prudence replied honestly. They drove home through the warm summer night, and when they reached the ranch, Dalton carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs, both of them laughing with the joy and absurdity of it all. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people learning each other with patience and care, and when Prudence fell asleep in Dalton's arms, she dreamed of the future they would build together. The years that followed were filled with hard work and joy in equal measure. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Dalton's expertise with cattle and Prudence's skill with numbers and planning proved to be an ideal combination. They expanded the herd gradually, reinvesting their profits wisely, and within 3 years they had nearly 200 head of cattle and had purchased adjacent land to expand their grazing territory. Prudence became known in the area as a fair and intelligent businesswoman, one of the few female ranch owners in the region who took an active role in operations. She learned to ride well, to work cattle when necessary, to negotiate prices at market. But she also maintained the home with care, planting fruit trees and expanding her garden, making their house into a warm and welcoming place. Dalton built her a proper kitchen the second year, with a cast iron stove and real counters and shelves, and Prudence cried with happiness when she saw it. He also built a second bedroom onto the house, anticipating the children they both wanted. That addition proved necessary when, in the spring of their 3rd year of marriage, Prudence discovered she was pregnant. She told Dalton one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset as had become their habit. "We are going to need that second bedroom sooner rather than later," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Dalton stared at her for a long moment before understanding dawned, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably startled the cattle in the far pasture. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "As certain as I can be this early. Mrs. Garcia confirmed it when I visited her last week." Prudence smiled up at him. "We are going to be parents, Dalton." "You are going to be the most wonderful mother," Dalton said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Our child is so lucky to have you." "Our child is lucky to have both of us," Prudence corrected. "You are going to be an extraordinary father." Their son was born in January, during a rare cold snap that left frost on the grass. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Garcia and a midwife from San Antonio, and Dalton paced outside the bedroom for hours, nearly wearing a path in the wooden floor. But when he finally heard the baby's first cry and was summoned inside, all the fear fell away. He stared down at the tiny red-faced infant in Prudence's arms with an expression of such wonder that Prudence fell in love with him all over again. They named him Daniel Thomas, after Prudence's father and the sheriff who had first vouched for Dalton's character. Little Daniel was a healthy, hungry baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined expression, and he filled their home with noise and chaos and an abundance of love. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler to curious little boy, the ranch continued to thrive. They hired additional help as the herd expanded, and Miguel became the ranch foreman, a position he filled with pride and competence. Carlos eventually married a girl from San Antonio and started a family of his own on a corner of the property where Dalton and Prudence helped him build a small house. Prudence proved to be as capable a mother as she was a rancher, managing to balance the demands of childcare with the needs of the business. She taught Daniel his letters and numbers in the mornings, worked on ranch accounts while he napped in the afternoons, and spent evenings as a family, the three of them together on the porch that had witnessed so many important moments in their lives. When Daniel was 4 years old, Prudence became pregnant again, and this time the birth was easier. They welcomed a daughter they named Mary Grace, after Dalton's sister and the grace they felt God had shown them in bringing them together. Mary had her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's gentle nature, and Daniel took his role as big brother very seriously, always wanting to help care for his baby sister. By the time Daniel was 10 and Mary was 6, the ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the area. They ran nearly 500 head of cattle, employed 8 full-time workers, and had added sheep and horses to their livestock. The original house had been expanded multiple times, growing into a proper ranch house with a wide porch and multiple bedrooms, and even a small parlor where Prudence could entertain the neighboring ranch wives who had become her friends. Dalton had aged well, the lines on his face deepening, but in a way that only made him more handsome, his dark hair now threaded with silver. He still worked alongside his men every day, refusing to become the sort of ranch owner who only supervised from horseback. Prudence loved to watch him with their children, teaching Daniel to rope and ride, helping Mary feed the chickens and gather eggs, always patient and kind. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Daniel and Mary play in the yard, Prudence leaned against Dalton's shoulder with profound contentment. "Do you ever think about that day in Gonzales?" she asked. "When I stepped off the stagecoach and you offered to help me?" "I think about it often," Dalton admitted. "I think about how easily we might have missed each other. If I had been late coming into town that day, or if you had been too proud to accept help from a stranger, our whole lives might have been completely different." "I do not believe that," Prudence said firmly. "I think we were meant to find each other. My father's dream brought me here, but I stayed for you. This life we have built, this family, this ranch, it all started because you saw a lost woman and offered kindness without expecting anything in return." "Your safety mattered more than anything else," Dalton said, echoing words he had spoken long ago. "That is still true. Your safety and happiness and the safety and happiness of our children, those are the things that matter most. Everything else is just details." "We have been blessed," Prudence said softly. "So incredibly blessed." "Yes, we have," Dalton agreed. He called out to the children, "Daniel, Mary, come here for a moment." The children came running, Daniel tall and lanky at 10, Mary still small and sprite-like at 6. They climbed onto the porch, Daniel settling cross-legged at his father's feet while Mary climbed into Prudence's lap. "Your mother and I want you to know something important," Dalton said, his voice serious but warm. "This ranch, everything you see here, it exists because of love. It started with your grandfather's love for his daughter, his dream of giving her a better life. It grew because your mother was brave enough to honor that dream, brave enough to travel into unknown territory and claim what was hers. And it became what it is now because your mother and I found each other and built something together, built it on respect and partnership and love. I know you are still young," Prudence added, "but we want you to understand that you can build your own dreams too. You do not have to stay here on this ranch if you want something different. But if you do choose to stay, we want you to know that you are not just inheriting land and cattle. You are inheriting a legacy of courage and love and hard work, a legacy that started with a man in Philadelphia who dared to dream of something more." Daniel looked up at them with serious eyes, so like his father's. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to make this ranch even better, make you proud." "We are already proud of you," Dalton assured him. "No matter what you choose to do with your life." Mary, less interested in serious talk, squirmed in Prudence's lap. "Can we have pie now?" she asked hopefully. "You made pie this morning and it smells so good." Everyone laughed, and the moment of gravity passed into the easy comfort of family life. They went inside and ate pie together at the big table Dalton had built, and afterward the children begged for a story. Dalton told them about the time he and Prudence had first met, embellishing details to make the children laugh, and Prudence watched him with eyes full of love. That night, after the children were tucked into their beds and the house was quiet, Prudence and Dalton lay together in their own bed, the window open to let in the cool night breeze. "Thank you," Prudence whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Dalton asked, his arm tightening around her. "For everything. For being the man you are, for loving me the way you do, for building this life with me." Prudence turned to face him, even though she could barely see his features in the darkness. "I was so lost when I came to Texas. I thought I was just honoring my father's wishes, doing my duty. I never imagined I would find home here, find love, find purpose." "You gave me all those things too," Dalton said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, working hard but without any real direction. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, something that would outlive us both. You gave me a family and a home and a love I never thought I deserved." They held each other in the quiet darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary together. Outside, the Texas night was full of sounds: crickets chirping, an owl hooting, cattle settling down for the night. The ranch they had built together sprawled around them, testament to their love and labor. As Prudence drifted toward sleep, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her father, whose dream had been the seed from which all this had grown. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in Gonzales, clutching a bank draft and trying to appear braver than she felt. She thought about Dalton, the quiet cowboy guardian who had protected her and taught her and loved her into becoming the strong, confident woman she was now. And she thought about the future, about Daniel and Mary growing up on this land, learning its lessons and maybe someday passing it on to their own children. The legacy would continue, built on the foundation of courage and love that she and Dalton had established together. In the morning, life would resume its rhythm. There would be cattle to tend and accounts to manage, children to teach and meals to prepare, fences to mend and horses to train. The work of the ranch never truly ended, each season bringing its own demands and challenges. But Prudence had learned that hard work shared with someone you loved was not a burden but a gift, an opportunity to build something meaningful together. She thought of the words Dalton had spoken that first night they camped under the stars, when bandits had threatened them and he had protected her without hesitation. "Your safety matters more than gold," he had implied through his actions if not his words. And he had proven that truth every day since, putting her well-being and happiness ahead of everything else, treating her as a cherished partner rather than property or possession. That was the real treasure she had found in Texas, Prudence reflected as sleep finally claimed her. Not the land her father had left her, valuable as that was. Not the successful ranch they had built, prosperous as it had become. The real treasure was the love of a good man, a man who saw her as an equal and treated her with respect, a man who had helped her become the strongest version of herself. And she had given him the same gift in return, believing in him when he was just a ranch hand with dreams, supporting his ambitions, building a life alongside him that honored both their strengths. Their love had transformed them both, making them better and stronger than they could have been alone. The years continued to roll by, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that makes up any life. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and wolves. There were droughts that tested their water resources and their faith. There was the year a prairie fire threatened the ranch, and they fought alongside all their neighbors to save not just their property, but the entire region. There was the heartbreak of a miscarriage between Mary and what would eventually be their youngest child, a boy they named Peter, who arrived when Prudence was 37 and surprised them both. But there were far more good times than bad. There was the year Daniel won the blue ribbon at the county fair for his calf. his face glowing with pride. There was Mary's sweet 16th birthday party, when half the county turned out to celebrate, and 3 different young men asked permission to court her, though she turned them all down, saying she was not ready yet. There was Peter's first word, which was predictably "Papa," and his first steps, taken while trying to follow Daniel out to the barn. There were quiet evenings on the porch that never lost their appeal, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. There were Christmases with the house full of laughter and the smell of Prudence's baking. There were Sunday gatherings when neighbors would come for dinner and stay late into the evening, sharing stories and music and fellowship. There were moments of perfect happiness. The time Dalton surprised Prudence with a piano he had ordered from San Antonio, knowing how much she missed playing music from her girlhood. The day the railroad finally came close enough that they could ship their cattle to market without long drives, improving their profits significantly. The evening Mary announced she was studying to become a teacher, wanting to bring education to ranch children who could not easily get to town schools. As Dalton and Prudence grew older, silver threading through their hair and lines deepening on their faces, they watched their children mature into fine adults. Daniel indeed took over much of the ranch operations, proving to be as skilled and hardworking as his father, though he had his mother's head for business. He eventually married a neighbor's daughter, a sensible girl named Sarah who fit into the ranch life as if born to it, and they gave Dalton and Prudence their first grandchildren. Mary became a teacher as she had wanted, starting a small school on the ranch property that served children from all the surrounding spreads. She eventually married one of her former students, a younger man who had grown up and returned from college in the East determined to win her heart. They built a house nearby and filled it with children and books in equal measure. Peter, the surprise baby who had arrived when his parents were beginning to think their family was complete, proved to have a gift with horses. He started breeding and training them, developing a line of cow ponies that became sought after throughout the region. He remained on the ranch, building his own small house and horse operation on the property, contentedly single for many years before finally falling for a widow from town who appreciated his quiet nature. Through it all, Dalton and Prudence remained at the heart of the growing family, their love story becoming something of a legend in the region. People spoke of the Eastern Heiress and her cowboy guardian, how they had built one of the finest ranches in Texas on nothing but hard work and devotion to each other. Young couples would sometimes ask them for advice on how to make a marriage last, and Dalton and Prudence would exchange amused glances before sharing their simple wisdom. Respect each other, work together. Never let pride stand between you and the person you love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration that brought people from 3 counties. There was a barbecue with beef from their own cattle, music and dancing under the Texas stars, and speeches that made both Dalton and Prudence tear up with emotion. Daniel presented them with a beautiful handcrafted bench for the porch, his way of honoring the place where so many important conversations had happened. Mary gave them a leather-bound book she had made herself, filled with stories and memories written by family members and friends. Peter surprised them with a matched pair of gentle horses, perfect for leisurely rides in their golden years. But the best gift was simply having everyone together, seeing the life they had built rippling out into future generations. Prudence counted 15 grandchildren at the party, ranging from Daniel's oldest boy, who was already 17 and helping run the ranch, to Mary's youngest daughter, who was barely toddling. 15 grandchildren, and more likely to come, all of them thriving on the land her father had dreamed of, and she and Dalton had nurtured. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was finally quiet, Dalton and Prudence sat together on Daniel's gift bench, looking out at the ranch that had grown so far beyond what they had originally imagined. 30 years, Prudence mused, her head resting on Dalton's shoulder. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I would live them all over again, Dalton said firmly. Every single day, even the hard ones, as long as they were with you. Even the day Peter fell in the creek and we thought he had drowned, and we found him an hour later playing in the barn completely dry, Prudence teased. Even that day, though I could have done without the terror. Dalton chuckled, then grew serious. Do you have any regrets, Prudence? Anything you wish had been different? Prudence considered the question carefully, as she always did. I wish my father could have seen all this. I wish he could have met you and known our children and seen how his dream grew into something even more wonderful than he imagined. That is my only regret, that he did not get to witness what came from his sacrifice. He knows, Dalton said with certainty. Somehow, wherever he is, he knows and he is proud of you. And what about you? Prudence asked. Any regrets? Not a single one, Dalton said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Prudence. The absolute best thing. Every day with you has been a gift. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first night camping together on the road to San Antonio. The same stars that had shone on their wedding night and on the nights each of their children had been born, and on countless ordinary evenings that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. Your safety matters more than gold, Dalton said suddenly, and Prudence lifted her head to look at him in surprise. What made you think of that? She asked. It is what I thought that first night when those bandits came to our camp. I remember thinking that I would give them anything they wanted, let them take everything I had as long as they did not hurt you, because you mattered more than anything else. And that is still true, 3 decades later. Your happiness, your health, your safety, they still matter more than anything else in this world. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes. I love you, Dalton Xerxes. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more years God grants us. And I love you, Prudence Xerxes. Forever and always. They kissed then, a gentle kiss full of 3 decades of devotion, and when they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as every day did. Daniel would need help with some business decision, or Mary would bring a student who needed extra attention, or Peter would want advice on a difficult horse. There would be meals to prepare and accounts to manage, grandchildren to spoil and fences to inspect. But tonight was just for them, for the love story that had started with a chance meeting in Gonzales and had grown into something extraordinary. Tonight was for remembering and celebrating and feeling grateful for the journey that had brought them here. As they finally rose to go inside, Dalton took Prudence's hand, lacing his fingers through hers as he had done thousands of times before. They walked into their home together, still side by side after all these years, still partners in every sense of the word. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness, alive with potential and promise, just as it had been that first day when a young heiress and her cowboy guardian had stood together and decided to build something lasting. The land her father had dreamed of had become the foundation for a legacy of love, one that would continue long after they were gone. And as Prudence fell asleep that night in the arms of the man she loved, she knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every uncertainty, every moment of fear on her journey west had been worth it. Because that journey had led her to Dalton, and together They had created not just a successful ranch, but a family, a community, a life rich with meaning and joy. The story that had begun with "your safety matters more than gold" had become a story about how love and courage could transform everything, how two people working together could build something that would last for generations. It was a story worth telling, worth living, worth passing down to children and grandchildren who would add their own chapters to the ongoing tale. And so the ranch continued, season after season, year after year, anchored by the love story at its heart. Dalton and Prudence grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their devotion to each other never diminishing. They eventually handed over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Daniel, content to sit on their porch and watch their legacy continue, offering wisdom when asked, but trusting the next generation to find their own way. When Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Prudence held his hand and whispered her love one more time, grateful for every single day they had shared. She continued on for 5 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone, that the ranch continued to thrive just as she and Dalton had built it. And when she finally joined him, slipping away on a warm summer evening much like the one when they had first declared their love, her family gathered on the porch where so many memories had been made and told stories of the remarkable woman who had been brave enough to travel west, wise enough to accept help when she needed it, and strong enough to build an empire of love alongside her cowboy guardian. The ranch remained in the family, passing from generation to generation, and always there were stories about its founding, about Prudence and Dalton, and the great love that had made everything possible. Their graves rested side by side on a hill overlooking the property, marked by simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their births and deaths, and beneath those facts, the words that had defined their life together. Your safety matters more than gold. Because in the end, that was the truth they had lived by. Not wealth or status or possessions, but the safety and happiness of the person you loved most. That was the foundation upon which they had built everything. And that was the legacy they left behind, more valuable than any amount of land or cattle or gold. Their love story became part of Texas legend, told and retold around campfires and dinner tables, an example of what could happen when two people found each other at exactly the right moment and had the courage to build something together. The Eastern heiress and her cowboy guardian, partners in life and love, who proved that the best dreams were the ones you never knew you had, and that sometimes the greatest treasures were found not in what you sought, but in who found you along the way.